Sadly for us, we were at the very extreme end of this illness, and most people don't go through exactly what we did, but because we didn't know about bronchiolitis, because we didn't know any of the signs and symptoms, things got quite bad before we got help. Unfortunately for us, Edwin had to be taken in an ambulance, and in the end they realised that his body was so tired from dealing with this illness that he just couldn't cope anymore. So he actually had to be ventilated and taken to a paediatric intensive care unit where he had to stay on the ventilator for a few days to allow his body the time to rest and to get a bit better before they could then allow his body to then start dealing with the illness. And for me, that's just such a shame, because it's a memory that's going to stay with me for a very long time, about seeing my little child that poorly, and it's very frustrating knowing that if I'd known, you know, I feel angry with myself that I didn't find out earlier. I feel angry with the staff that I didn't know anything about this, and sad, because the poor little fella had to go through all that, and I had to sit at his bedside. But the staff were fantastic, and he did get treatment, and surprisingly we went from sort of one awful extreme where he was so unbelievably poorly to a week later where he was like a different child, and he had colour back, and he was healthy, he was breathing on his own again, he was feeding brilliantly, and he's gone on to be a fantastically strong little boy. And that was just kind of this blip caused by lack of information, I guess. And then when he got better, his brother decided that he wanted to do the same. So he ended up having the same experience of going in on a ventilator and having to do the same rest period and get better and stuff. But again, within about a week, he bounced back. So thankfully with him, because we now did know a lot more of the signs and symptoms, it didn't get quite as severe. So although we went in an ambulance, it wasn't quite as dramatic, and it wasn't, you know, he wasn't ventilated straight away. But sadly, he too needed the break, so he had to go on the ventilator, and again, I had to sit and wait for him to get better. And you know, it hit them both in the same way. It just overwhelmed their little bodies, because at the time that this happened, they were both just shy of their due date, so they were still premature. They still shouldn't have even been born by this point, so you can imagine how small and vulnerable they were. But again, you know, Rufus, he was actually ventilated for a little bit less time than Edwin. He was then in hospital just having what they used to call a whiff of oxygen. He only needed a small amount just to help him through. He was in for a few days and then came back and has gone on to be, you know, healthy and strong and happy. And yeah, I mean, for a while, every cough and cold they got, they kind of had this kind of wheeziness that was a kind of legacy of it. But apart from that, they've been absolutely fine. So, yeah.